Welcome back, everybody, to the Renaissance Humanism podcast. Today's episode, I will be discussing colonialism, geopolitics, and France and Africa. Since 2020, there have been several coups in Africa, having originated primarily from French colonies, or former colonial territory, to be more clear. When looking back at the French and British colonial empires, we can see two different strategies implemented, methods, and goals of both empires. The British opted for economic control and seizing territory and trade routes that benefited British trade and the acquisition of local wealth and resources from its former colonial territories and control over the global trade routes. For the British, their imperial project was like a corporation to increase their balance books. In contrast, the French imperial project in the 19th century was primarily ego driven, and the goal was to seize as much African territory as possible in order for prestige reasons. See, the British had a maritime empire. It built its empire during the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century, and also it embraced ideas of free trade. So it was very much a commercial empire. That's why the British today and the Americans get along so well, because they both have the same goals and understanding when it comes to geopolitics and international relations. As I've spoken above, the British were a business-driven empire where the French wanted to be in charge of the whole political system within countries. This may in turn, when the French left Africa and gave up its colonial empire in the 1950s and 60s, the French hollowed out these nations' political systems internally. When we fast forward to the present day, the French have their bags and left their old colonial territories, empires, and left them prying for coup d'etats. And vulnerable places like Chad, Niger, and other former French colonies are very vulnerable to places like China and Russian Federation, also trying to expand their own influence in these regions. Now, the French and English come from two different legal traditions. This is the English common law and the Roman law. One of the reasons why former British colonial territories tend to be far more successful than their other European counterpart was two dominant legal traditions, which is the Roman common law, favoured primarily by mainland Europeans. It was more of an imperial-based legal system where the sovereign made the laws and used the ultimate power, imperial power, to dictate to their citizens laws, beliefs, and way they should live their lives. Roman law was a microcosm of a wider European political environment in order to try and control the peoples of Europe. This became predominant in the mainland Europe primarily due to the European Wars of Religion from 1517 to 1648, though the dates do vary depending where you get information. So some say it lasted until the 18th century, some say it ended in the 17th. European monarchies favour Roman law due to its legitimization of centralization of their kingdoms, being dictatorial in the belief and thoughts of their citizens. In contrast, English common law is made by the people, for the people, and can only be intimated with their consent. This is why former British colonial territories are far more better off than their French counterparts. French laws are dictatorial, English laws are based upon principles of consent. This can be demonstrated by the famous quote from one of England's most famous queens, Queen Elizabeth I of England, who ruled from 1558 to 1603. She stated that, "I have no desire to make windows into men's souls." Queen Elizabeth used this expression of not making windows into men's souls to describe her unwillingness to persecute people based on their interpretation of religious texts, as their souls way of perceiving things, of the soul way of perceiving things. She does not want to control what goes into minds and souls of her subjects. Okay, so what is the future of France and Africa? As these coups run their course, French involvement could take a number of different forms because the French, they built their colonial empires not to be profitable. It was ego driven. So it means they can either leave it, like the French, like the Russians, like other actors, both good and bad and different nations, try to influence these African nations going into coups like Niger, or they can just say leave it and lose all interest. It just depends how the French see themselves and their own attitudes to Africa, because unlike the Anglo-Spare, unlike the English-speaking world, the French don't have the same scruples. They've got no problem assassinating people, doing military interventions, or even supporting strongmen and dictators in order to fulfill the French policy. This is where French and the English-speaking peoples really differ because French, they're far more nationalistic, they're far more pro-French compared to English, who I tend to be far more quiet nationalism, and to America to a slightly lesser extent. Okay, I think that pretty much covers everything in this episode. If you've got any questions, please leave a comment. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you want to reach out to me, you can contact me on Medium, you can contact me on LinkedIn, Twitter, or in the comment section below. And your support will be much appreciated by liking and subscribing to this podcast or YouTube link. Thank you.